Hello and welcome to Kumi Now. Thank you for joining us for this latest online gathering as we talk about the companies and the corporations that profit from the commercialization of Israel's occupation of Palestine. My name is Carla Brown. I am a Kumi volunteer from Winnipeg, Canada, in Treaty 1 territory, the traditional land of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, and Dakota, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. Before we start, I would like to remind you that our webinar is being broadcast live on Facebook and will be posted to YouTube. So if you do not want to have your photo appear online, please make sure you turn off your camera. We would also love it if you would quickly share one of the links that are being shared in the chat on your social media so that others may join us for this event. As usual, if you have an idea or a project that you would like to share for up to 5 minutes in a future meeting, please email us at kumi@kuminow.com. Now it's time for our weekly activism survey. We will now launch the poll. Please note that there are 3 questions in the poll, and so scroll down for the last one. And go ahead and put your answers in. We'll give you a few moments for this. So the questions in the poll are, what action did you take related to the last topic? I see someone has participated. The number 2 question is, in 2013, the United Nations released a report requiring itself to do what? And one of the following companies has never profited from Israel's occupation of Palestine. I'll give you another few seconds to put your answers in. Okay, thank you for engaging the survey. The answer to question number 2, in 2013, the United Nations released a report requiring itself to do what? Is the second option, to create a database of companies doing business with the Israeli settlements. The United Nations finally released their first list of companies in 2020, and this list included 112 companies. The answer to poll question number 3, what company has never profited from Israel's occupation of Palestine, is the third response, Overend, Gurney and Company. The reason we're sure of this is that Overend, Gurney and Company went out of business in 1866 after having overinvested in the railway industry right before the collapse of the British stock market. Otherwise, it can be difficult to tell if a company is involved in Israel's economy. We hope that you will find this session today interesting and informative. I'd like to start by having everyone you'll be seeing today introduce themselves. So we'll go with Omar first and then Raya.
Good evening or good morning, depending where you are. My name is Omar Harami, and I will be with you briefly, just giving you an update on what's happening in Palestine and Israel this week. Thank you.
And Raya, can you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. My name is Raya Sana. I'm the director of the Research Center Who Profits that I'll be talking more about throughout our session today. Yeah, and other than being the director of Who Profits, I'm a researcher. I do freelance research, mainly focusing on Palestinian labor and trade unionism. So yeah, that's what I do in my a little bit of spare time that I have.
Thank you. Omar, can you give us the update from the ground in Palestine right now?
Yes, thank you, Carla. Yesterday there was a small demonstration at Damascus Gate. It was sparked after the Israeli police attacked a number of young Palestinian ladies who were present at Damascus Gate. Most of the young ladies were from the Afro-Palestinian community, as they refer to themselves. In Palestine, there's a small community of Palestinians from African descent. Most of them have been in the country for close to between 100 to 200 years. This has really sparked outrage within the community, and many people and friends in the Black Lives Matter in the US have already started to show solidarity. Kayed Fasfous, who has been for 90 days under protesting his administrative detention because going through a hunger strike. This is a photo of Israel decided to release him. This is a photo of him. He's a known bodybuilder in Palestine, and this is before the hunger strike and before the arrest, and this is after the arrest. So people are happy and congratulating him because he was really able to force Israel to release him after going through 90 days of hunger strike. He's not the only one. There's 9 Palestinian prisoners who are on hunger strike. Miqdat Qawasmi, he has in the photo here, it's his father is next to him, and also Ayman Ode, who is the leader of the Palestinian of the Arab Joint List in the Israeli Knesset, who is visiting him. Miqdad is still under hunger, is going through a hunger strike to this day. Also today completing his 90th day of hunger strike. Jerusalem, there's a very big crackdown by the Israeli police or army. Rida Obeid, who's 13 years old, has been sentenced 2 days ago for 9 months in prison that he needs to serve. He is from a neighborhood of Jerusalem. Israel claims that he was engaged in Palestinian demonstrations. This is a photo. Israel has placed a small piano next to Newgate for the people who know Jerusalem, and his photo has become viral. People showing solidarity by posting it or sharing his story. He's a young kid, and no kid should be in prison for 9 months. And this is not a unique story. In the photo here, you see 3 young kids. Muhammad, Kayed, and Ayham. 2 are 13 years old, and the youngest is 10 years old. Kayed is 10 years old, and they have been arrested and kept for over 12 hours at the Israeli police station. Israel claims that they were creating problems, political problems. Unfortunately, this continues to be a reality. People have requested the names. If you would like to mention their names to your representatives or for media or friends or your community. Muhammad Maher, Kayed Rajabi, and Ayham Hadra. Thank you.
Thank you for that news, Omar. We now turn to our main issue of the week, the commercialization and corporatization of the occupation of Palestine, and our special guest, Raya Al-Sana. As she speaks, if you think of a question, please type it in the chat. When we get to the question and answer portion of the webinar, I will ask as many of your questions as we have time for. Raya, please go ahead with your presentation.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for that, Omar and everyone. I work for a research center called Who Profits from the Israeli Occupation, and we are a feminist Palestinian-led research center that is based in Haifa. And since 2007, we've been producing knowledge and conducting research, highlighting the various actors, private sector actors that are involved in the violation of Palestinian and Syrian rights and international law. Our point of departure as a center is that Israel is a settler colonial state, and it practices occupation and apartheid to maintain its regime of domination and repression and dispossession of the Palestinian people. We see that companies have the interest of course, as companies always do, of maximizing their profit, of generating profit, but in doing that, they also act to implement political imperatives. So the majority of Israel's violations of Palestinian Syrian rights, violence that is inflicted, forced displacement that is ongoing, crowd control, population control, invasive surveillance, incarceration that was talked about earlier today, everything that we see, or how the life of Palestinians is shaped under Israeli rule, is facilitated by companies. So it's not kind of invisible hand, or the Israel kind of conducting this solely through state bodies, but actually a lot of it is carried through by private entities and private bodies and private businesses. A lot of them are international, and if they're not international in the sense of where they stem from, they have international reach. So we look into companies that are involved on a number of levels. So either involved in what we call population control. So that's kind of all the companies that are involved in Israel's direct violent repression of Palestinians, and surveillance of Palestinians wherever they may be. It includes companies, for example, like AnyVision, that some of you might have heard about. We're now conducting more research into Microsoft, Google, and Amazon, looking at the way that they support Israel's kind of security apparatus more generally, and specifically around invasive surveillance technology. We look at companies that are involved in the economic exploitation of Palestinians. So that's the exploitation of both of natural resources, but also the exploitation of labor, because Israel relies heavily on the exploitation of Palestinian labor. We look at, and this was kind of the bulk of Who Profits work originally, looking at the Israeli settlement enterprise that kind of sees, that is constantly growing, and it seems like it's never halting despite its very overt illegality and condemnation on an international scale. But we monitor and conduct research into those companies that are involved in the Israeli settlement enterprise. So those are companies that are either directly involved in the construction of the settlements, or the financing of construction and project in the settlements, like all the Israeli banks, for example, or the companies that are directly operating. So they have factories in the industrial zones and the agricultural zones in the settlements, or companies that are part of the development of businesses in the settlement. For example, green energy at the moment. Israel's kind of really pushing an agenda of green energy, the production of green energy, particularly electricity from solar energy and from wind turbines. And in those, for example, companies like ABB, which is a Swiss company, is involved in delivery of solar panels that are in place all over the Jordan Valley, for example, or SMA, that is again a German company. And what's interesting about these companies is that they, because of the area in which they're involved, because of the business area that they are involved, these companies often have kind of, good practice regulations. But when it comes to Palestine and their relationship to Israeli occupation, these regulations kind of go out of they are emitted. And these are some of the companies, for example, that are on the UN database. But what we've noticed is that the UN database, the UN itself has not fulfilled its own obligations of updating the database on an annual basis, but also that hasn't in and of itself formed a hindrance or kind of prevented further companies from being involved in Israeli violations of Palestinians and Syrian rights more generally. So these are the kind of companies that we look into, but then how do we, like, what do we actually produce? And, you know, kind of what could be, how could you access all of this information? So we produce a number of things. So on the one level, we have a database where we outline different companies, their corporate structure, but also their direct involvement of the violations of Palestinian and Syrian rights on the ground. So we have a database of over 400 companies that we regularly update and regularly expand, and you can use that database to kind of find out if companies from your country are involved and what kind of involvement, and so on. We also produce reports that stem from the database. So depending on what we find in terms of corporate complicity, then we generalize out of that and we produce analysis. So if at some point we realize that there's a lot of companies involved in a particular infrastructure construction project, then we produce an analysis of that particular infrastructure project, which companies are involved, but also how does that particular project fit within the broader system of repression and dispossession of the Palestinian people more generally. We also produce reports around particular industries. So we produce reports, for example, some of our recent work has been around the Israeli agri-tech business. Other reports have been around greenwashing the occupation, so green energy, be it wind turbines in the Golan, in the Syrian Golan, or solar projects in the occupied West Bank or in the Naqab. We've also been really invested lately into looking at the Israeli tech industry, its relationship to the Israeli military, but also how specifically Israel transfers knowledge from its military industrial complex into other fields. So for example, during COVID, we saw how a lot of Israeli companies that are traditionally military companies or homeland security companies were easily able to transfer that knowledge that they have acquired through direct repression and their close-knit relationship to the Israeli military into the medical field. So, for example, Elbit System, one of Israel's biggest military companies, one of the largest supplier of drones to the Israeli military, was involved in developing kind of medical tech during COVID, and now its medical tech section of the company is generating enormous profits. So those are kind of some of the analysis that we do. We look at kind of the trail of money, the Israeli governmental policy, and who are the companies that are involved and how they're involved, and what does this actually mean for Palestinian life, for Palestinian land, for Palestinian resources, etc. And the third element of our work is that we operate as a free and open information center. So anybody that has any kind of request, wants to know more about a particular company's involvement, wants to understand more about a particular Israeli sector, how does it operate and what does it mean for Palestinians, for the Palestinian economy or Palestinian individuals more generally, is free to kind of contact us through our website, and we can help as much as we can. So yeah, this is a call for all of those who want to know more or have interest in particular companies or particular projects. to feel free to contact us, because that's what we're for. We do our own research and we focus on our own areas, but we're also very much here as a resource for people who are involved in kind of advancing corporate social responsibility more generally, or holding corporations to account, and Palestinian rights more generally, when it comes to corporate complicity. So yeah, this is a call for you guys to kind of reach out, use us as much as you want and as much as possible. That's what we're here. That's what we're here for. So I'm gonna stop here, and so yeah, and I'm open to questions if people have any.
Thank you so much, Raya. What we'll do before the question and answer session is our activism section. So we'd like to introduce the action for the day and give everyone a few minutes to get started on this before the question and answer. As you can see on the slide, which I think you can see, which will come up momentarily. There we go. As you can see on the slide, we'd like to call out the corporations that profit from the occupation by rebranding them based on their names and creating new slogans for them that will tie them to the occupation. Raya, is there anything you would like to share about this action? You can see the invitation on the screen there, and what people can do to bring awareness to this profiteering off of the occupation.
Okay, so I mean, this action is directed towards Hewlett Packard, if I understand correctly. And maybe just to say that there was a split in HP a while back, a few years ago, and the company split into two corporate entities. One is HP and one is HPE, which is Hewlett Packard Enterprise. And so actually HP is no longer involved in the occupation in the way that it was before after the split. And HPE, so Hewlett Packard Enterprise, had an Israeli spin-off that is called DXE, and that's the area that is involved. HPE was heavily involved in a database system called the Aviv system, that basically collects information on Palestinians as they move in and out of the checkpoints. That system is now being revamped, and it's coming a different yeah. So now it's a different system, and it looks like the company that is mainly involved in that system would be Elbit and IBM. Rather than HPE or DXE. But HPE, Hewlett Packard Enterprise, is definitely delivering services to the Israeli military and the Israeli police. We will be, as Who Profits, we will be publishing an update on the involvement of HPE and DXE in the Israeli occupation shortly. We're currently conducting the research, and we will be publishing it in the next month. So those are definitely enterprises that should be targeted, but HP is no longer a target in the same way that it used to be. And that's the nature of kind of corporate complicity, right? And that's the nature of companies. Companies are constantly in movement, and they are changing, and they are developing, and they split, and they break apart, and they kind of buy new entities, and they sell parts of their business operations. And that's why it's important for us to constantly be delivering up-to-date information on what's going on. So yeah, so keep an eye. I can definitely send it to this platform, and you can share it once we have the most up-to-date information on it. But definitely targeting and focusing on companies and holding them to account is the way to go, because these companies are severely complicit.
Okay, thank you for that update. I see Ryan is updating the screen, the slide on the screen right now, you can check with the Who Profits database for companies that are most relevant to your location where you are and the activities that you're involved with. So we're going to give you 5 minutes now for this activity of looking into what are some of the companies that you could target, that you could request action from them or call them out for their actions that they've taken. So we'll have 5 minutes. Music will play, and you can do a bit of research in these moments. And if you have any questions, we'll come back for the question and answer. And so please put those in the chat, and we will do that in a few minutes.
Would it be useful if I maybe shared my screen and showed people the Who Profits search engine and how people can use it to find companies in their own countries and so on?
Sure, that would be fantastic. Ryan, is that possible for her to share the screen? Yeah, he's going to make that possible.
Sorry, I'm on my iPad, so it's going to be a bit tricky. How can I do it? How can I share my screen? Ryan.
Or would it be possible, what's the URL that we need to go to?
It's whoprofits.org.
Ryan, would it be possible for you to share the screen? Okay, it's up there now, Raya. Can you talk us through where to go from here?
Yes, so if you see the search engine, if you open up the advanced search, it can give you options. So you can either, if you know the company's name, then you can put it in the company's name box, and that gives you all the information that we have on the company. Yeah, for example, Elbit. If you click on Elbit, then it opens up the profile, and you can read about it. Yeah, here we go. So it gives you, and this again, the Elbit profile will be updated in 2 weeks. So there'll be a new one for you to look at, but it gives you what the company is actually involved in, what is it doing, its ownership structure, its partners, and then related links. So related publications that the company is involved in. If you go up the page, you can see how we categorize the company. So the area of involvement, the sector, where is it traded? So it's kind of a public company. It's traded in the US and in Israel. Its revenues, its operations, and then the global presence. And that's the basic profile that you'll have about the company. And of course, the contact details if you wish to contact them. Maybe just to let people know that before we publish any information about any company, we contact them. We let them know that this is the information that we've collected, that we will be publishing this information. And so they have the right and the opportunity to respond before we publish. If they respond, we publish their response as well. So just for people to know that. And then you can also search, if you go back to the search engine, you can also search by category of involvement. So if you click on that, for example, category of involvement, you can kind of look at, if you're looking for companies, for example, that are involved in population control, then you can click on that. and you can find all the companies that we have under population control or anything. So you can click by, oops, okay, that's a glitch. So you can search by area of category of involvement, you can search by the sector, settlement, where it's headquarters. So if you want to look if there's a company located in your country, so you can look at that. So if you click like, I don't know, Germany, then you can see all the German-based companies that we have on our database. Here we go. So these are the companies and so on. So this is a tool for you guys to use.
Okay, thank you very much. Based on the questions that are coming in, Ryan, I wonder if we should actually do the question and answer first, since a lot of people are wondering about companies, and leave the activism to the end once people have learned a little bit more. So I think I'm just going to jump right in now with question and answer. So number one, do you have model letters available to use to contact companies?
Model letters in what sense? I mean, we have our own letters that we send to the companies saying, you know, we found this information about you. If you don't respond to us in X amount of time, we'll be publishing it. But we don't engage in conversations with companies. Maybe just to say that we are a research center, we're not an advocacy group, and we don't do advocacy, and we don't do engagement with companies. So we're not in the business of trying to get companies to engage with us. That's for different organizations, that's for activist groups, that's for people like yourself to do. We provide the raw data, the research. And so in that sense, we don't, we highlight particular companies, but we certainly don't call for particular actions around these companies. That's partly to do with the kind of the legal situation that we're in, but also it does with the ethos of our work, that we are a research center rather than advocacy group. So our engagement with the companies is not what you're doing is bad, so you need to do X, Y, Z to remedy your activity, but rather we say, we're noting that this is what you're doing. If you have something to say about your activity, then we're happy to hear it. But that's the level of engagement that we have with companies. So I'm not sure that our letters would be useful for campaigning purposes.
Okay, so there's not a plug and play template that you have that people can just sign their name at the end, but you have a great source of information and resource so people know what issues to bring up when they write to companies.
Exactly, that's the purpose.
Okay. All right. Someone is asking, which companies should we focus on right now? And I'll add a second question, which I think is related. Someone said, based on the criteria you've described, the breadth of corporate involvement in perpetuating the occupation is extensive. So do you think a more targeted campaign aimed at companies that contribute to the more oppressive features of the occupation, like something specifically about house demolitions or specifically about military operations, would a targeted campaign like that be more practical than simply contacting individual companies?
Again, it's difficult for me to say because you know, we're not as Who Profits, we don't do advocacy, so we can't give that kind of form of advice. But there are the kind of other platforms that do that. So the Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions, Palestinian Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions Committee has a target of companies that they publish, that they call for people to focus on and to campaign around. And generally speaking, campaigning is more powerful when it is targeted. So it makes sense to kind of choose, strategically choose companies to focus on. The involvement is extensive, and I think maybe just to say something that part of what we try to do in our publications is to shed light on the on issues. So what does focusing on companies allow us to do? It allows us to talk about particular dynamics of repression and dispossession. So focusing on G4S in the past enabled us to have a serious conversation about what's taking place in Israeli prisons, what Palestinian political prisoners go through, how is that system kind of maintained, how it's operated, and how repressive and violent it is. And I think beyond kind of the details of the company itself, but actually thinking about what is the current political moment and which company enables us to tell a story that we want to tell about Palestine. Because that, through focusing on companies and looking at companies, you can highlight particular issues. It's at the end of the day, the way that I see it, it's not just about kind of company X and company Y, but it's how do we focus on company X and company Y, and for the end result is a greater understanding of lived reality in Palestine and giving people an actual something tangible to relate to, but also something tangible to do in terms of kind of ending corporate complicity. So maybe those are the kind of things that people should be thinking about when they are thinking about their campaigns and the targets that they want to target. And then obviously there's the strategic question about, can you actually target that company? Because a lot of companies are unreachable. Some companies on our database, for example, are small private Israeli companies. Those are ones that it's probably not that strategic to focus on, because it's hard to get to them in a way. But
yeah, writing letters is one way of reaching companies, and responding to them on Facebook is another way sometimes when they aren't reachable, even if they don't allow you to put a comment directly on their Facebook page, for example, if you can post comments on their comments on their posts that they make and things like that. Someone has commented on the chat that mainline denominations engage companies, and some of them have divested from companies that are involved in Palestine. And so contacting your denomination for updates and engagement is another possible direction to go. Raya, do you have any further comment on how some churches have been very proactive in this way?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think the work that is happening around divestment is very powerful, and it's gaining speed and it's gaining grounds, and it's obvious that companies are forced to act when they are pressured. And as you mentioned, there's a number of ways in which companies are forced to kind of act. Kind of the brand, the protection of their brand name is very big for companies, and it's very important for companies, but also companies are living organs that survive through financialization. They survive through investment. Sometimes it's private investment, but often it's kind of investment by pension fund, public institutions, and so on. And so that gives us gives kind of the general kind of civil society a way in, and an ability to influence these, even if they seem to be kind of very huge corporate monsters in a way. There's often a way in, and through the domination, through the churches, that's a very strong way to go. And I know that there has been campaigns around this, yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of, those are the kind of actions that lead the way. So now we have more pension funds divesting, we have government pension funds divesting, and so on. And those are big structures and the big institutions with a lot of money and a lot of headway. So I think, and those are your representatives as well. So I think it tells a lot about an institution to understand and to know where they're putting their money. And I think if institutions are projecting themselves or positioning themselves as ones that are for human rights, for international law, for dignity for all, for respect, and human rights more generally, then they should be implementing that in all of their activities. And their investments is certainly a very powerful tool that they have to pressure corporations and to pressure even governmental bodies to act in particular ways. So I think that's those kind of actions are powerful because they're not just a question of individuals, they're a question of kind of all institutions acting together in the name of all of their members. So beyond the kind of the financial element of it, there's a very huge symbolism that is involved in these kind of actions.
Thank you. Someone has asked about Israeli extraction of Palestinian natural resources. Do you have reports on that that can be found on your website? And what are some of the specific minerals or other resources that Israel is taking from Palestinians?
Mm-hmm. So certainly Israel exploits and plunders Palestinian natural resources, which is a crime under international law. There are huge companies that are involved in that. We're talking about water, we're talking about sand, we're talking about stones, any kind of natural resource that you can think about, it is being exploited and being plundered. And I think importantly, with regards to Palestinian natural resources, specifically in Area C of the West Bank, that is the majority of the West Bank, in which Palestinians have no access, and it's completely under Israeli military rule. That's the area where the majority of the settlements are constructed, etc. That system of inaccess and Israeli plunder was also outlined and structured through Oslo. So the Oslo Accord, which was a 5-year interim peace agreement in 1993, had many clauses about kind of what land Palestinians have access to and what resources Palestinians have access to, the right of movement of Palestinians. It organized kind of the accelerated kind of control and dispossession that we see today in the West Bank. And in the Oslo Agreement, there are a number of clauses about natural resources, so about access to water, access to land, and the ability of extraction. And in it, it gave Israel the ultimate right and the ultimate power to extract Palestinian natural resources, particularly from Area C. It also banned Palestinians from the ability to develop their own ways of extracting natural resources. So it's a very complicated system kind of exploitation of the Palestinian natural resources, but we see that it's ongoing and it's always developing. So in our report on solar energy, we talk about the sun as a natural resource, something that we don't often talk about as a natural resource, but we talk about the sun and the ability to kind of utilize the power of the sun as a natural resource in that instant to generate electricity as a form of a crime of international of a violation of international law. So there are a couple of reports that we have. One is around agriculture, for example. One is around, as I said, green energy, and it's kind of scattered around the various different elements of reports that we have.
Okay, a bit of a shift in questioning here. You mentioned that you live in Haifa, and someone was wondering, living there and researching this kind of information, do you experience intimidation?
No, I mean, I mean, maybe just to say that I guess we become very accustomed to what it means to live as a colonized people under colonization. So you kind of normalize a lot of systematic repression and violence that you kind of become accustomed to. So my no isn't a no. My no is a no for me, but it isn't a no in the sense of like no, because evidently the existence of this system in the way that it is very restrictive. It is very violent. It's very insidious in kind of overt and covert ways. And I think the last uprising in May 2021 showed that how Israel engages with the Palestinians under its control is very similar in nature and very similar in way, whether you are a carrier of Israeli ID or whether you're in the West Bank, or in Gaza. But so there's a whole system of violence and repression that we live under. For our specific work, that is the reason that we choose to remain as a research center, not as an advocacy place. So that gives us the ability to kind of operate in a much more freedom and a much more freedom than others who do direct advocacy. And certainly we don't experience the same pressure and violence that Palestinian civil society based in East Jerusalem, Gaza, or the West Bank experience.
Several of the questions are specific about companies, which I think people can find answers to by searching on the Who Profits website. One last question, someone asked, do you work with economics departments in universities? You mentioned your research center, not advocacy. Is that one of the places where your research takes you?
We have cooperated with some academics or students in around specific projects, but it's not something that is systematic and is always there. Maybe just to say that we definitely don't work with Israeli institutions. If it's an academic institution, it'll be either a Palestinian academic institution or an international academic institution without the participation of Israeli academic institutions or Israeli state-funded or state-related institutions. But it's not a systematic relationship. It depends on the project that we're working on.
Okay, thank you. We're 10 minutes to the hour now, so I think we'll shift to the question and answer, or sorry, to the activism section of our time now, now that people have gotten a little bit of information from Raya and are hopefully searching the companies on the Who Profits website and finding which ones are relevant for them. So you can see the challenge on screen here, which maybe doesn't apply to HP, but you can look up the companies you're interested in on the website. So we'll give you a few moments for that, and then we'll come back and do some promotion for the next week's session. So please open up that website and take a few moments to do a bit of searching. Well, I hope you all were able to find good information about where to target your efforts during this activism time. Thank you everyone for joining us today. And thank you, Raya, for dedicating your time and for sharing with us. And thank you for the work of Who Profits, what you do to create this extensive resource of information that we can use to drive our advocacy efforts and our purchasing and investment choices. A link to the video of this gathering, along with the links that were shared today, will be available on the Kumi Now website, and the video will be on YouTube in a day or so, and also will be shared in the newsletter. You can subscribe to Kumi Now on YouTube, and you can subscribe to the newsletter to make sure that you receive all of these notifications. We would greatly appreciate it if you shared this informative session with your friends and colleagues on social media, through email and conversations. Please also consider sharing material on Kumi's upcoming sessions. Next week, we will focus on how women are affected by living in and through conflict. If you would like to be reminded of the online gatherings an hour before they begin, you can register for email reminders at kuminow.com/online using the form at the bottom of the page. So thank you all again for joining us. We hope to see you back in a week's time. So thank you. Good night, good afternoon, or good morning.
Thank you.